Hello and welcome to the Romance Track here at Continual. I'm your host, Gail Martin, and tonight we are talking about paranormal romance. But before we launch into that topic, let's let our wonderful panelists introduce themselves, starting with Nancy.
I'm Nancy Northcott. I write the Light Mage Wars paranormal romances about wizards fighting ghouls and demons. And I write historical fantasy for Falstaff Books. And with Jeanne Adams, I co-write the Outcast Station science fiction series.
Okay, Layla.
I'm Layla Dorine. I write the Comet Lake Wolf Shifter series. In addition to, got a Lion Shifter harem book coming out later this year. And I have a couple standalone paranormals that I do. One is a snake shifter and one is an alien who happens to crash land in a cornfield.
Cool. Dawn.
I'm Dawn Dehel. I write under DS Dehel. I have a series about Irish gods in the modern world. And I'm working on a historical paranormal right now with witches and vampires, actually, which is kind of strange for me. But...
Okay. Davidson.
I'm Davidson-King. Most people know me as Meredith. I write all sorts of things. I'm pretty much like don't follow what I do with my brand because I just write everything, but I do have a paranormal series, Black Veil, which is about vampires and mermaids and dragons and witches and shifters and you name it, they're in it. And I'm actually have the next book in that coming out in July.
Very good. Dahlia.
Hey, I'm Dahlia Rose. I'm a USA Today bestselling author. I write multi-genre, anything from sweet and cozy to contemporary to mystery and paranormal. My new book, The Wolf is a Shifter, that is coming out in May, I think May 17th. I also am working on a historical called The Count of Draven Hill, and that's going to be historical vampire. And I've written shifters, dragons, you name it, I've probably wrote once or twice. And I also have my Aurora Cosme series where she's been hit by lightning and she sees ghosts now. And her best friend is Madame Laveau. Book 2 of that will be coming out later this year.
Very nice. Liv.
Hi, I'm Liv, and I want Dahlia's historical vampires novel. Just FYI.
I'll make sure.
I write 2 paranormal series with co-writer Irene Preston. I also have and the 2 series we do are MM, and then I have a solo series that's MMM, paranormal romance, with a vampire, a shifter, and a mystery. And I am working on edits for a book called The Lighthouse Keeper, which is historical Victorian Gothic witches, magic, and romance.
Okay. And I'm Gail Martin and Morgan Brice. As Gail, I write epic and urban fantasy, but as Morgan, I write urban fantasy, male paranormal romance, because I think every story is better with ghosts, vampires, or witches. So what got you interested in writing paranormal romance? Nancy?
Well, it probably goes back to superheroes because I grew up reading superheroes and I liked when they had relationships. You know, I mean, I love the exploding stuff and the superpowers and the zipping around. I love all that, but I like it too when they have relationships. And I've liked science fiction and fantasy for a long time. And so when I set out to write romance, it just seemed kind of natural to put some magic in it because it's hard to think of superheroes who haven't been done before, but magic belongs to everybody. And so that's kind of how I got into it.
Okay. Layla.
I started reading a lot of paranormal right out of college. You know, up till college, it was always the stuff for school. When I got out of college, you know, I'd always loved reading. So I started grabbing like Laurel K. Hamilton and J.R. Ward and just all the, you know, Sherilyn Kenyon, and just like everything that I grabbed for books was male, female, paranormal romance. And I still have a good chunk of them, but there were male characters in the books that I was like, oh my God, these guys would fit better together than, you know, this, you know, the guy with this girl. And so when I started writing the paranormal, I wanted to write the guys that I had fallen in love with in these books. Like, these guys needed their stories told. And yeah, I just fell in love with paranormal and the shifters, especially dragon shifters and wolves and lions and bears, and now even the little ferrets and the rabbits, which you would see little glimpses of them in certain books, or they'd talk about, oh, you know, there's a swan shifter, oh, you know, there's a baboon shifter. And it's like, okay, I want to see how many different shifters I can create and write and just weave into worlds.
Okay, Dawn.
I've always been a fan of paranormal when it comes to reading. Like, my shelves have always are full of them. In fact, I was at the bookstore last night and walked out with 3 that are paranormal, very wildly different, but they're all ultimately paranormal. And so I think it just gravitated that way. And I agree with Nancy. The world's a lot better with magic in it. And so that just makes writing much more fun, and it opens up a lot of possibilities.
Okay. Jeannie, introduce yourself, please, and tell us why you decided to write paranormal romance.
Well, I'm Jeannie Adams. I write urban fantasy and paranormal romance and space adventure. And I decided to write paranormal romance because I love to read it. And I'm sure everybody else has said this too, there's never enough. There's never enough. There's always another good book, thank God, to read in the paranormal romance genre. And there's always something cool to take away from that and write about or imagine. And it's just so rich with possibility. So I love it.
Okay. Davidson.
Okay, so like I'm a daydreamer, so I will daydream from everything from like real life stuff to not real life stuff. And I, you know, read that way. So, you know, J.R. Ward, everyone says her name. She was really kind of like, in my mind, made me think, yeah, I could do this. I could write a vampire. I could totally do this. But my mind can't just write a vampire. Of course, I have to create a world. And I was just like, I wonder what, like, it brought a dragon into it. And no, I'm going to bring a seer into it. And then I just realized I created an entire universe. And I think what I love most about writing it is how it is completely has nothing to do with what's going on with the real world right now. Like, it's so great to jump in there and just be like, I could do that. Who's going to stop me? Like, no one can research to see if, you know, dragons don't do that, do they? How many dragons do you know? I mean, like, you know, so I kind of like totally love that I could just be like, I don't have to answer to anybody. And it just lets my imagination just go further than anything else I write.
I don't know. I have had 1 or 2 people comment on books and say, vampires don't do that. And it's like, pardon me. Don't want to know how to do that. Dahlia.
I had a different upbringing to all you guys. I was raised in a Caribbean island, very small, Barbados. You can drive around it in one day, so it wasn't a lot to do. So I read, but my aunts used.
Oops, I think you froze. Dahlia froze. Let's go with Liv, and we'll pick Dahlia back up when she unfreezes. Go ahead, Liv.
Cool. So I think you can
It
blame
scared the hell out of us, but it made me curious. So.
Yeah, can you back up for a minute because you froze? We got the part about driving around the island and reading.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Well, like I was saying, after being terrified by folklore stories that your parents used to scare you, I stopped being scared and I started researching everything that they talked about. And then movies like The Race with Charlie Sheen.
I love that movie.
That movie was my foray into paranormal, and I never looked back. It was great. And then I saw Interview with a Vampire, and I was like, okay, well, I'm in for good.
Yeah.
And it just spiraled into something great from there. And, you know, you went from reading it to writing it, watching it. And that was when I was about 12 years old. So I was kind of writing vampire stuff at 12 years old.
Mhm.
So my parents didn't see it, of course. And then when I went to lived in London, it was Jack the Ripper and more vampires and things that went bump in the night, Jekyll and Hyde. So they kind of hooked me by just sending me over there, and I never looked back.
Very good. Liv?
So I think you can blame Anne Rice and Charlaine Harris for why I am writing paranormal romance. I read the Vampire Chronicles when they first came. I started with Lestat, and that was when that book first came out, and then I worked backwards to interviews. So it was a long time ago. But it wasn't until I read Dead Until Dark by Charlaine Harris that I thought, you know what, that's what I want to do, and sort of went on from there. A little bit of mystery, frequent frequent vampires, the occasional shifter, and yeah, we went on from there. I did have a reader one time tell me that the Pax Beta could not cut someone out of a pack, only the Alpha could do that. Cool, good on you. Read somebody else's books, dudes.
Where is this guidebook? Like, seriously, where is it?
No, rule book, yeah.
There are no rules.
Right?
I fell in love with vampire romance when I was a preschooler watching Dark Shadows. I mean, Barnabas Collins and the doomed romance with the Doctor, and then Josette and ghosts and werewolves, and that made a lasting impression. You know, be warned, what you let your kids watch never goes away. And so that kind of programmed me early that there should be romance with the ghosts and the vampires. And of course, I read Anne Rice, and I read the Sophie Stackhouse books and all of those things. But what really got me going with the paranormal romance was I fell in love with Supernatural. And then during one of the hiatuses, of course, I binged 11 seasons in 4 months to watch the 12th season on time. But in the hiatus, I started reading the fan fiction, and then I started reading the slash fiction, and then I said, this is just really good. And then I started reading the published slash fiction, and the published male fiction, said, oh, this is just too much fun. I got to be part of this. And that's where Morgan Brice came from. So, you know, it's got a long, windy road, but it has a lot to do with TV influences as well as books. So, when you're doing a paranormal romance, how does weaving the paranormal piece of it into the romance part, how does that make the structure and the plotting of the book different from, say, a contemporary or historical romance that doesn't have supernatural aspects? Nancy?
It's another element, and it has to be woven in through the story. When I first started writing romance, Lynn Kurland had just won all kinds of awards with Stardust of Yesterday, which was a ghost romance and really kicked off the paranormal genre. And you'd go to conferences and editors were saying, well, okay, I mean, paranormal is fine, but you have to be able to strip out all the paranormal elements. And I was like, then why am I going to put them in exactly? And by the way, the hero of Stardust of Yesterday is a ghost, so it'd be really hard to strip out that particular paranormal element. But I think if it's not woven into the world, if it doesn't feed into the plot in some way, then it is just window dressing. And so I think it's important to figure out how, in my case, is magic going to work with this? And I would assume for other people, it's like, how does this character being a vampire or a shifter affect the way they interact with the other characters and with the plot? And so really it's just one more element. It's just more pervasive than a lot of them, for me at least.
Okay. Layla?
When I wrote my Snake Shifter book, it started in the kind of human world and then transitioned into like the underground snake kingdoms. And once I'd created the first, when I created the Snake Kingdom, I was like, when I do the next shifter book, I'm really not going to deal with the human world much at all. I want to deal with the shifters in their own worlds and their own packs and their own territories. So my wolf shifters, while there's mention of travel into, you know, human populated areas, the world itself is structured around the pack, and everything takes place in and around Comet Lake, in and around pack grounds. And one of the big things that I established early in the world too was that humans were shifters who'd lost the ability to shift. So right away I was establishing that it was a paranormal world and humans just existed into it because they could no longer shapeshift. Because I really wanted to focus on, at least in the wolf shifters, I'm focusing on the inner workings of pack, the inner workings of like that system that they have going on there. So I do use things that we like we have a shifter version of Meals on Wheels. And one of the issues that they're struggling with is the trafficking of exotic shifters to either other shifter communities or out into the human world. But we're not dealing with interacting directly with the humans, or how do we hide what we are from the humans, because the world really does belong to the shifters.
Okay, Dawn.
I think, well, Nancy's right. You can't strip it out because your character is defined by his or her supernatural ability, you know, and so I think in one part it becomes part of their character, like maybe what they look like or how they act. That's one of it. And the other is, as you create a world, it's one more thing to keep track of, or you write yourself into crazy corners that you've got to figure out how to get yourself out of. I had two characters, they were dead. That makes romance a little more complicated.
But impossible.
Well, they were in the land of the dead. It all worked. It worked in the end, but I was kind of walking around my house going, what did I do? You know, I created this rule that, you know, in 3 books prior that now I have to somehow circumvent in a way that was plausible. And so I think that it's another sort of mentally for me, writing is like braiding. It's one more strand I have to keep track of and keep going and keep everything balanced. But that's the fun part.
Jeannie.
Well, I have to agree with both the stripping out you can't do and the fun part. In my Witches Walk series, which is that behind me, my witches hide in plain sight. They basically take the, you know, sort of myth and magic of Salem and it'll be like, look, we're just like Salem, except actually we're real witches. And so I don't tend to have to sort of explain a lot, but like Layla was saying, you have to really track what you're doing. And so you don't kind of have to do, if you start with the idea of a series, most of the time you don't paint yourself in a corner and go, oh crap, I wish I wouldn't have done that 3 books ago because now I need to do this other thing. But I'm notorious for book Bibling on Excel because I screw it up otherwise. And in my urban fantasies, they are definitely hidden. So making sure that those fantasy elements are, you know, that's again, part of the fun too, is how do you keep the world separate? How do you shock people about the fact that one exists and the other doesn't? And it's just weaving the threads and honestly, why do it if you can't have that much fun with it? And I'm not sure that answered the question, but anyway.
That certainly did. Dahlia.
For me, it started kind of confusing because I moved to Charlotte in 2005, and then I was with this book critique group, and they told me that my vampires couldn't live in the Caribbean, and I'm like, why the hell not? It gets dark there too, you know. And I went to my first Dragon Con, and I went to a panel, and was on the panel, and she was kind enough to talk to some of us after the panel. So I brought this up to her and I said, well, they tell me that my vampire can't live in the Caribbean. And she said, why not? She's like, why can't he live in the Caribbean? Why can't she build it around folklore. And that's when she had the series that she had out, and her crap, the name of the series evades me because I haven't had coffee, but and that's been all day. But her series built not only mysticism but religion, power, vampire, demons, angels, everything. She weaved everything together, and she said, as long as you've got a balance throughout the canon, there are no rules. Basically, like I said before, she's like, throughout the canon, build your paranormal to suit you, your culture, what you want them to do. So I've gone into writing paranormal that way, and I build my worlds and everything to suit me. And if people say that that's not how it works, I'm like, well, that's how a lot of things don't work, but it works for me, and my readers seem to enjoy it that way.
Okay. Davidson.
So I pretty much make up my own rules.
Yay.
And I just, I mean, I would write regular stories. People would be like, I couldn't suspend belief. And I'm just like, all right, forget it. We're just going all out. So when I do my paranormal, I'm just like, my vampires, they're fine in the sun. They don't even care. But the thing is for like Black Veil, what I ended up doing is I introduced the story with Jace, who thought he was human. And he was well aware of vampires and everything like that. And they tells a story about how many, many hundreds of years ago, his mom told him the story about the sky opened and the ground opened and creatures took over the earth. And the goal was to stop humanity from killing itself. And so was born this new world. So humans know of all the creatures that existed. And, but I thought when I was moseying into this world, I would mosey into it like Jace, as knowing that there's magic, but thinking that I'm human. So how would he discover all of this stuff hands-on? So when I was building the romance for them in the Blood Boss, it was opposites. It was an enemies to lovers kind of a thing. So I was able to take that common knowledge of how I would write an enemies to lover and then twist some magic into it. And through that one, new creatures were introduced because now Jace was thrust into this world. And therefore I was, and my readers were. So when I bring dragons in and I brought all this stuff in, all these other creatures in, it was much easier to enhance the magic each book and decide, as I was writing one, it's like, why can't a dragon do that? Well, my dragons are doing that. I don't have to explain myself. Like, I would sit there and have these arguments with myself while I'm writing. I'm like, oh, I don't think I could do that. And then I'd be like, why can't you do that? You could, do that. And I would do it. And, and then it's, of course, the notebook, like, all right, note to self, so-and-so can do that. Because later I will go back and I'll be like, can he do that? So that is where it does get tricky. So when you do make your own rules in paranormal romance, you have to remember to know and remember your own rules.
Take notes.
Yeah, so notes are key. But I mean, I think when it comes to the romance is these creatures still have the same feelings as humans. It's just they can, do things a little bit differently. And in some cases, some of them have been around for so long that they kind of lose touch with certain things. So it's kind of interesting to bring two completely different, like I bring a dragon and a vampire together, a human and a vampire together, and then I brought a seer and a vampire together, like totally different on different sides, and to see them kind of like work together and clash in many ways, it's the fun part of it. So, and then you just sprinkle in some magic and it works.
Okay. How about you, Liv?
So I've been so absorbed with everyone's answers now, I don't know what to say. I think that I didn't hear anything I disagreed with. I think that you cannot, if you're writing a good paranormal romance, you can't pull the paranormal elements out and have it still work, because they have to be intrinsic to the character. And I think you have a lot of freedom, at least on the first go round, but as you are exploring your freedom, you better damn make some notes. Because so that the second book and the third book all make sense. Most of my books have some sort of mystery element or some problem that's outside the romance and probably is more tied with the paranormal. So the characters are exploring their relationship while they're trying to find the magic whiz bang and it all comes together at the end.
That's the technical term.
Yeah, that's yeah. The magic whiz bang. That I think helps me create a dark moment that doesn't involve, the late onset communication breakdown that drives them apart, right? They can get together be coming together as a couple in the sort of second half of the book, and then something horrible can happen. But they stay working together as a couple, and get to the final grand finale. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I think it makes I think having the paranormal piece makes the world building a little more in depth, because if you're writing something that's set in the modern world and there's no magic, there's no paranormal, then you might want to, you have to do the world building to make people feel like this is authentic to New York City or Houston or wherever you've set it, or your own little fictitious small town. But that's describing the real world and pieces of the world that everybody's familiar with. And when you're writing a paranormal, you've got to decide what lore you're going to use and what you're not. You have to bring the readers along to understand this is your vision of a vampire. This is how ghosts work. This is how magic works. This is how this world you're creating functions, having those kinds of things in it. And it's more complicated than just saying, oh, you've never been to New York City? They have a lot of taxi cabs and there's a lot of traffic. Here, have a coffee. There's more unusual stuff that people aren't familiar with than something you can just look up on YouTube if you didn't get a reference. So I think that's one of the things that, for me, really differentiates it, which leads into the next question of how do you do your research? How do you decide what lore to use and what not to? And what sources do you look up to say, do vampires do this? What about, could a shifter really? And how does magic work? I find myself Googling things and going, it's not real. It's not real. And then I find it on Google anyhow. So it makes me wonder. Nancy, what are some of your research tricks?
Well, I started out with just the magic and kind of made up the rules for that. And I didn't really draw on one source. I read a lot of books about Wiccan lore, candle magic, herbology, rocks and stones and crystals, and kind of took some from column A and some from column B and mixed them all in together. And I did write it down because I knew that, space, the final frontier. And if I don't write it down, it's going to be off in orbit somewhere. So I wrote it down. And then if there's a particular element in the story, like in Embattled Mage, the mage doctor is trying to figure out why ghouls, who are ghouls and demons are the villains, as I said, why the ghouls are kidnapping particular people and trying to steal their livers. So I talked to a professor at a local college who knows a lot about the liver and just its different properties and what does the liver do in the body. And by the way, the whole Prometheus thing about it growing back, that's true, it grows back. And then the doctor was trying to analyze blood to see if these people fell within these parameters. And so I can't remember the name of it now, but I looked up the device that people use to analyze blood, and then I changed it so that magic would work with it. And so it just kind of depends. I don't do as much research anymore for the magic. Although if I want a mineral that will do something in particular, I'll go look that up, because if I haven't used it before, I don't have a record of it. But most of the research I do is for other story elements and not for the magic. And it just kind of depends on the story.
Okay. Layla.
When I started writing Comet Lake, the thing I researched most was actually communal living, especially like the communes from back in the 60s and 70s, because I really wanted it to be the focus to be about the wolf pack and how pack takes care of itself and the inner workings of a pack. So I ended up creating, this, there's a communal kitchen. The pack controls the businesses, but in a way that allows everybody to explore. If somebody's an awesome woodworker, they're going to have a woodworking shop, and until it gets off the ground where they can trade and barter the way they need to, the packs got funding that they can tap into, stocks and bonds and things that they've done, where they can fund these things within the packs, so that the people in the pack don't have to worry about having human money and human resources. They can, oh, you've got 50 zucchinis from your garden and I've got this amazing rocking chair. Well, I'm gonna, trade you zucchinis for a rocking chair or what have you. It's all trade and barter. They have a series. They have elders who train younger members of the pack to handle the shifter politics, to handle the movings and inner workings between pack, so that when they have their large gatherings and new members want to join them, they can easily assimilate new members in. They can create these opportunities. During one story, I have this, he's really been a member of the MC, which is kind of pack protection, but he loves to bake, he loves to cook, he wants to own a bakery. So the MC guys get together and they all help him get all the equipment, everything that he needs to set up this bakery on pack grounds. And now in order to run that bakery, he takes strawberries and trade for stuff. He takes raspberries and trade for stuff. Oh, somebody's made some awesome jelly. He'll trade that for things and use them in the recipes and feed the community, so nobody comes in and walks away hungry. They even provide baked goods for snack time for the kids at the shifter school. That's all provided within packs, so everybody's taken care of. The homes of their elders are repaired by the woodworkers if they need to be made accessible because somebody can't get around so well. They will just call in members from the woodworking team and they'll go in and they'll remodel, they'll lower cabinets, they'll put railings in, they'll put stair lifts in, so that people can live comfortably all through their lives, right there in their pack, right there in their homes and on their grounds. And that's really been the research for how do you set up communal living, how do you fund that, and how do you keep it moving generation after generation so it thrives.
Now I want to be a shifter. Dawn? Dawn?
Let me start by saying I love research. I am a fool for research. I even love research from actual books. I will just get stacks of books and fall down rabbit holes. So I really do have a bad habit of getting caught up in minutia, and I think that's both good and bad. It helps build your world, but you can also spend hours looking to see what kind of shoes might have been worn casually in the 1920s. I'm really, really bad about that. But I also love it because currently I'm working on a historical fiction paranormal set in the 1920s, and I didn't want to write a diesel punk. And so it's just been, again, a lot of research, where does this place and did the CTA go? And a lot of it's about detail checking because, as you said, there will be somebody who will tell me that, no, in 1929, the CTA didn't go out to Ravenswood. Yes, it does. And I have receipts. I'm telling you now. And that same person's going to tell me that Al Capone didn't work with vampires. Prove me wrong, right? Because you can't, I've researched that. So I think that the research informs, and it really, at least for me anyway, is a comfort and an escape when I hit a roadblock.
Okay, Jeanne.
Well, I have a library degree, so rabbit holes are my friend. I love research. And I think that one of the things that probably, I'm sure most of us have gone down the rabbit hole, like Nancy said, crystals and candle magic and, old grimoires. I know you've mentioned that, Gail, from, Pennsylvania Dutch country. And, but then there's also the fun part of, because witchcraft especially doesn't have the Old Testament, the New Testament, it has nothing that is traditional, because they burned a whole shit ton of people and all of their books in the 1500s and 1600s, and oh gosh, all the way up to 1980. But that kind of research, you can find so many like loose threads where.
Oops. We lost you, Jeannie. Dahlia, why don't you pick up and we'll come back to Jeannie.
Okay.
Oh, Jeannie lost you. Are you back?
Yeah, I'm back.
Okay.
Woo!
Go ahead, Dahlia.
Oh, I thought Jeannie wasn't done.
I'm good. Go ahead.
Okay.
You sure? Okay. I tend to go the research route with books. I have tons of books on mythical beasts, books, things that aren't supposed to be real. I also have a family that is really big into herbalism. We're in the Caribbean, so we used a lot of the things that we found in our gardens to heal, poultices, for cold remedies. My kids hate when they have colds because I whip out some stuff and they're like, God, it tastes awful, but it works. But it works, believe it. And so, with between that and our heritage and the fact that I can research, and I have a friend who's one of the high priests for a DC coven and everything. So I was there for a polycon and we went to dinner. So I had my trusty little notebook so I could learn things about sigils from her, because I needed to use sigils in a book that's coming up. And any resource you can, as long as you can glean that information that you want, you can weave it however you need to work in your paranormal book. So I just, like Nancy said, I just pick from column A, column B, or I'll call my mom and say, hey, what was that thing that you put on my foot when I sprained my ankle and made the swelling go down? And I can take and twist that into something needed in the book as well. And I do a lot of, like, my Wolf series right now is based on Viking lore and like Norse lore. So I'm doing a lot of research on that and loving it because I'm all into Vikings now. So
What's not to love?
I
Yes.
know. And building a whole fictitious town in the Appalachian Mountains around Vikings and using a lot of the old world ways of living. It's fascinating and it's fun to write.
Okay. Davidson.
So, I'm actually ready for this question. So my research consists of things along the lines of, like, there's a couple things that are really important to me when it comes to research, and that's names. Every character that I have that is named it's a very long thought out process. And even if the reader themselves doesn't pick up on it, I know. Because I know, when I'm it's just a name to some readers, but to me, there's so much more to it, because I will research the name, the meaning, the culture behind that name, so that maybe there's, and sometimes I have gotten a reader to be like, oh my gosh, I just figured it out. That was his name. It was, yeah, thank you. That was like 5 hours worth of work for that one name. And I think the other biggest way I research is based on everything I've read. And I take everything I've read through my entire years of living and decide what I don't like. I don't like that they do that for vampires. I don't like that they do that with dragons. And so I say, I'm not going to do that. And to me, that's like a form of research, because it's basically, it's researching what I don't like and then putting into my books. And I think one of the other things that is big for me is being really, really careful. You can go into books and you could read about fairies, and you could read, there's fairies spelled this way and there's fairies spelled that way, and they are both completely different kinds of fairies. Make sure you don't mess that up. And then it's like, then taking characters that I've I've read that, like mermaids, for example. There's a lot of stories that I've read, and mermaids are like these like wonderfully happy romantic creatures. And I'm like, dude, no, they're not. They are vicious, horrible creatures. So I was like, I'm gonna make them the bad guys. And then, people be like, why? And I'm like, because if you look back on all these books, like, where did you get that they were nice? They're horrible. They're so mean. And I kind of just, again, go back in time through, books that I've read. And I think that it's probably through other authors who have written fiction that is my best research, because there's no like, history book that, that tells you what definitely happened. And of course, the biggest part is making sure that what I write is authentically mine and not another author's. Like, I can't go ahead and like make up a creature and be like, because so-and-so wrote this, I'm going to do, no, that's their creature that they invented. You can't. So I am very careful when I do that. And I'm like, if I'm going to invent like a woodland fairy or whatever, like, let me make sure if I do this, that I'm not stepping on the toes of other authors who have written about woodland fairies. So I will go start digging into, how many books have been written about this, who's written it, what have they, because I don't want to, I don't want war.
Yeah. Okay. Liv.
So I made a conscious effort to read as many vampire books as possible. I agree with Davidson that I didn't want to read something and then borrow it, but I wanted to make sure that I had a sort of grounding in the lore. And I read, Dracula. I read The Fever Dream by George R.R. Martin. I read Mary Janice Davison's Queen, whatever her name was, and many, many Anita Blake books, probably more than I really needed to. But Barbara Hambly's Those Who Hunt the Night, just sort of dug into Octavia Butler's Fledgling, like all different, because I felt like if I was going to work my way into a genre, I needed to have a grounding in what was going on before. And so, yeah, that's what I did. And beyond that, it's Google, because if Google doesn't know it, it doesn't exist.
This is true. Well, folks, we have blown through our time. So lightning round here very quickly. Let's go around and let everybody know where they can find you online. And if you have a new, recent, or upcoming book, let us know. Nancy?
You can find information about me and about my books at nancynorthcott.com. I'm on Twitter, where I'm at Nancy Northcott. And I've actually finally figured out Instagram, where I'm Nancy Northcott author, but there's not much there because I just figured it out. But I'm so proud of myself. And then this weekend, as we record this, the first weekend in May, will be the launch of The King's Champion, the third and final book in my Boar King's Honor historical fantasy trilogy from Falstaff Books. And it's historical fantasy with romance. It's not paranormal romance.
It's awesome.
Okay.
Oh, well, thank you.
Layla?
You can find me on pretty much any social media platform, Facebook, Tumblr, Twitter. No, I just deleted my Twitter. But Instagram, I dabbled in TikTok. I've got a Wix. I've got Rainbow Lyrics and Mellow Mushrooms, which is my blog, and I've really got to get that moving again. And my last two Wolf Shifter books came out in January and March. So I'm working on book 6, but the last book to come out was called Swamp Wolf. It came out in March. It is another piece of the puzzle as they work through solving the exotic shifter trade that's going on.
Okay. Dawn, how about you?
The easiest way to find me is at dsdehel.com, and it's DEHEL. And there's a link tree there to all of my social media and all of my books. Most recently, my Irish Gods series was bundled, and you can get that through Ecstasy Books for a really good price.
Okay. Jeannie?
You can find me at jeannieadams.com. You can find me on most social media, and you can find me here on Continual a lot. My My latest release was a Witches Walk series and story in the anthology Love and Valentines at Canham Castle, which came out in February.
Okay. Dahlia, how about you?
You can find me everywhere. Dahlia Rose on unscripted.com, author Dahlia Rose, TikTok, Dahlia Rose 101029. Just look for Dahlia Rose. My face is all over the place. And and March 17th, my book, The Wolf, will be available. It's up for pre-order now. You can find me in July in London for London, in September for Rare Florence, and One Love in Charleston, South Carolina, and then Left in the Low Country in Charleston, South Carolina in October. So you just see me all over the place and just, throw something at me and I'll be like, oh, hey.
Okay. Davidson.
Okay, so you could pretty much find me everywhere. Seriously. It's probably obnoxious, but my website is davidson-king.com. So if you're like, I don't want to talk to her, I just want to know what she's got, that would be the best place to go. If you want to just deal with my nonsense, then Facebook, and Instagram and TikTok and Twitter, but I'm much more mean on Twitter because I just get mad at people and I just yell at everybody over there. And then so my next book is actually coming out May 18th. It's actually part of a multi-author series, The Elite. It's Dealer of Secrets. Really had a lot of fun writing that one. It's not paranormal though, sorry. But my next paranormal one is coming out on July 5th, which is The Last Seer, and ridiculous amount of fun writing that one. I just have fun doing what I do. I'm sorry, I just do. And that's going to be it, because I'm just going to ramble if you don't stop me. So
Okay. Liv?
I am on my website, livrancourt.com. I am on most social medias in some combination of Liv Rancourt. TikTok is Liv Rancourt Author, which is a new-ish thing for me. So I'm exploring. It's been an adventure. And my upcoming release, I'm going to show off the cover again. You see it? It's so pretty. I just printed it off. This is like off my printer. So in real life, it's even prettier. The Lighthouse Keeper comes out July 6th. So we can be like book birthday buddies, Davidson. And
yay.
And it's Victorian Gothic, witches, magic, heat, fog, a lighthouse, all the good stuff.
Okay. And I'm pretty easy to find at morganbrice.com. I'm on all the social media under that name. So if you spell it right, you'll find me there. My newest book is Peacemaker, which is the first in the Sharps and Springfield series, kind of like Wild Wild West if Jim and Artie were together. And the next book is Point Blank, which is the next Badlands adventure. But most of the time you can find me here on Continual. So thank you so much to all of our wonderful panelists for being with us tonight. And thanks to all of you for watching and listening. There will be more romance coming up on Continual. So we'll see you online.